Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Stitching Tales. I am Johanna Lundström.
And I am Malena Hjerpe.
And we are a lot of things, and one of the things that we are is co-authors of a book called Fit for Knits. And if you're watching the video now, you can actually see the book, but if not, you can check it out. It's available in most big bookstores, especially in the Amazon around the world. And this is a book that we published in November of 2023, and it's a book about sewing and fitting knit garments. So in today's episode, we want to take you a bit behind the scenes and talk about how the book came about, and of course share lots of really useful information that is in the book, and perhaps a little bit of the struggles as well in publishing a book. And yeah, it's not all roses. It's also quite difficult, but we did manage it through, and we're very proud of our first co-authored book. And Malena, perhaps you could start and tell a little bit about the backstory of how this book came about.
Yeah, so we had been working together on a few smaller projects earlier, like I helped you out, you helped me out. And then you asked me if I wanted to be part of this book that you have been thinking about writing. And like my initial reaction was like, that sounds like a huge commitment. It's going to take a lot of time and during a long time as well. That's scary. I want to say no. But then on the other hand, it's like, this is a great opportunity. Now you have a business, you can't say no just because you're scared. So yes, I said yes. And yeah, here we are, 2.5 years later, we have a book baby together.
Yes, it's wonderful. It's very well. It was a long pregnancy, I should say that, yes. Because as Malena said, it took us about 2.5 years from idea to finish the book.
Yeah, we worked for it like on 2 years, but I was actually on maternity leave when you asked me, so it took a while before we actually could start writing it.
Yeah, it was definitely a long process, and the process started even before that, because I've written several sewing books before. One is about sewing your own activewear, one is about how to use a cover stitch machine, and then I wrote a book about sewing your own jeans. And I really like to think about, when I think about sewing books ideas, I like to look at like white spaces in the sewing market where there's a need for information, but there's no real other books serving that type of topic. And so it should also, of course, be something that I have knowledge in and is interested in writing a book about. So I own a lot of pattern fitting books, and I find they're extremely important and useful. But however, all major pattern fitting books that are out there only focus on, or at least 99% focus on woven fabrics. So I thought, why is there no book about pattern fitting for knit fabrics, which is what a lot of us is both sewing, of course, and wearing today. So it felt a little bit like that kind of topic needed to be addressed in a more modern manner. So I've been thinking about this book for several years before that, but I didn't have the knowledge myself, because I know about sewing knits a lot, but pattern fitting is not my expertise. But that was because then when me and Malena met, I realized that the person I needed for this book was standing right in front of me. And so, Malena, could you tell us a little bit about your background and why it was so valuable to have you as part of this book process?
Yeah, and it's so interesting what you say about most things are for woven, and I completely agree. Also, when I was in school, we mostly talked about woven stuff. And just like tiny little course about knitted garments or knitwear. So when I started working as a pattern assistant, I basically didn't know anything about how to work, how to pattern construct for jersey garment, for knitted garment, or anything. So I really had to learn by doing, basically, and of course, like a lot of really competent pattern makers that could help me out. But yeah, I worked as a pattern maker now for almost 15 years, And I would say majority of that time I've been focusing on knitted garments, and we always divided into knitwear and jersey. So jersey is basically, yes, knitted fabric, but you cut and sew. And knitted garments are like, you know, those heavy knit kind of styles.
That are knitted on.
So,
I should perhaps explain, like, are knitted on a machine, right? Like you would hand knit
Yeah,
the garment, but knit
exactly.
on a machine, so you don't cut it from a fabric, right?
No, exactly. Yeah, that's the biggest difference. Both are knitted, but jersey. When we say jersey, we mean that it's been cut out from a fabric and then sewn together. Yeah, I've worked many years with those types of garments, and it's really like a special skill, I would say. You can't work with it in the same way as you have when you work with woven fabrics, and you have to think a little bit different when you construct the patterns. There are a little bit different rules. I'm so happy to been able to put all the knowledge and experience that I've collected during this year in this book, because I really think that I love working with knitted fabrics, and there's not that many books about it. So I'm really happy about what we accomplished.
Yes, that makes me so happy to hear. And we really had a high ambition level for this book. We definitely wanted to make sure that it was extremely easy to understand, because sometimes instructions for how to alter a pattern can be a bit confusing, I find, especially if you are a beginner or new to this stuff. They are sometimes difficult words, and it's a little bit difficult to understand the diagrams. So we decided to take a bit of a different approach in that we are extremely visual in the presentation. So each step is very clearly defined, so it's easy to follow, like from 1, 2, 3, 4. Every step is just one single step. You don't add a lot of steps in each. So the visual, it's a very visual learning book. And that's also why it ended up being 260 pages, which is like the thickest book I've ever done. I think most of my other sewing books is around 190 pages or something like that. So yeah, it was a large undertaking. And we actually, together, between us, drafted around 1,000 illustrations. So
that's a lot.
That's a lot. So that gives you an idea. So that means that on each page there's about 3 to 4 illustrations on average. So, but that's because we really wanted to make sure, right, Malena, that you could easily understand just glazing through the process, right?
Exactly. I think this is a very visual thing we talk about. So of course we want to write a little bit and like share the knowledge behind it and the thought process behind like the different adjustments and like what you need to think of, but like it has to be visual. It has to be like you should just be able, like see it on the pictures and then like understand what we mean. That we really aimed for, and I think it was really a process also. Like the first illustrations we made, we worked with, and then we continued to next chapter and next, and like it evolved because it took so long time. And then when we revisited those first chapters, it's like, no, we got to redo this. This is not good enough. Like we have evolved the method, like how we want to show and how to visualize it. So we had to redo quite a lot as well, like the first chapter that we did. And I'm happy that it took so long time, because then you can really think about it and redo things that had to be redone. So yeah, we really focused on the visual, and it's not so cramped in on one page. It's not too much. It's very like airy, so it's really, and it's easy to read as well. I think that was really important for us to make it visually very appealing and easy to follow, and yeah, not too much like crammed in one page.
Yeah, for you that are watching the video right now, I'm showing the book, and if not, of course, you can go over to my website, theloststitch.com, to see examples from the book if you want to learn more. Yes, as Malena says, it's a very like, it took a long time, and I think that's wonderful that we didn't rush it. I think that's probably one of the best thing about doing this project for so long, that we really evolved over time. It's interesting. It's actually quite fascinating that you start with one idea and then we realize that we were doing a bit overly complicated. and then we could like reduce, and it was such a wonderful thing. And I think I've learned so much from this book. I mean, I've been teaching sewing in various ways over the years, but I think that this book was probably the biggest like aha moment, because it was really, we were really taking something that can be a bit overwhelming and complicated and really trying to make it as simple as possible, which is also, we have gotten absolutely amazing reviews for this book. I mean, everyone that has written a review over on Amazon, for instance, has mentioned these particular things, that, you know, it's easy to understand, it's very easy to follow, it answers all your questions. And to me, that is like the most validating thing when you put so much work into a book, that when it gets to the hands of our fellow sewists, that you find like, wow, this is really helpful. And both people that are beginners and people that are advanced have said that they have found this book really useful.
Yeah, so it was really fun to read that some 82-year-old person had read it, and it was really helpful, and someone had sewed for over 40 years and learned so much new things. And then I was like, perfect. Then we hit the mark when jersey has not, or knitted garment, it has not been talked about enough. There really is a lack of knowledge there with when it comes to how to deal with knitted fabrics, because it is a specialty.
Yeah, it definitely is. And what would you say, Malena, is some of the common challenges that one might encounter when fitting knit garments as opposed to garments made with woven fabrics?
Yeah, so the construction of the fabric, I would say, since it's knitted, it's loops, which gives us stretch, which is the most fantastic thing about knitted fabric. It really, like, the fabric molds around your body then, like it's stretched out where it needs to. So it's very comfortable to wear then, of course. But when you sew, the seams might also be stretched out. And the seams need to be also stretchy enough, because if the fabric is really stretchy and the seams are not, then the seams will crack and will start to pull and will not be comfortable. So really, the sewing is so important when working with knitted fabric. And you usually don't, since the fabric is stretchy, you usually don't have that much shape within the garment, like bust darts or seams that have shape to it, like you have in a woven. So that is also the tricky thing about knitted patterns, since all the shape are basically then in the side seam, and that can be a lot of shape in the side seam, and you can't, like, for example, if you make a shaped waist, you can't make it too exaggerated in the waist, because then it's going to be drag lines because of that. So you need sometimes to, how can I say, redistribute the shape so it goes around your body. For example, you have darts in the back waist to make a nice silhouette. So it can be tricky when you don't have those shaping seams as you have in the woven. So that's but you can add those, of course, yourself, and that we show in the book as well. Like, if you want to add a bust dart, for example, or if you want to have waist darts at the back, like we show it really clearly, both how to sew it and also how to add it on the pattern, because the sewing part is it has a huge impact, I would say, on the fit as well.
Yeah, it's very good you brought out the thing about darts, because sometimes you might feel a little bit intimidated by making darts or adding darts to knit garments, because it can feel a little bit tricky to sew. But we show some really easy methods, very detailed, so you will get like great result. And there are also some patterns that have darts, because you, Malena, you have a top, the Hazelhen top, where you actually offer an option, right, with darts.
Yeah, exactly. I have both B cup that is then without the dart, and then the D cup with a dart. And if you need to increase it even further, it's so much easier to do a full bust adjustment on a pattern that already has a dart, because then it's so much easier to just increase that dart. But yeah, sometimes, even though the fabric is stretchy, sometimes you need a dart to get away those drag lines that can appear.
Yeah, as Malena says, there's like you come to this edge or the limit where you have to do something in order to fix the issues, depending on how the body looks like. And also another thing that we also address a lot in the book is fabric, because not all knit fabrics are created equal, which again will affect the fit, right, Malena?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it has a huge impact. I mean, if you sew tight pair of leggings, those always have negative ease. And if you use a fabric that has less stretch compared to what the pattern is designed for, it is going to be too tight. And the fabric also needs not just stretch on, it needs to be stretch on all ways, like 4-way stretch. It can't just be stretchy on the horizontal way. So it's really, really important to match the right fabric with the right pattern, so so the fit is going to be right. And you've written a huge chapter about the fabric, and there are a lot of different types of knitted fabric.
Yeah. So in the early part of the book, we talk about the different fabric choices, and I think roughly I cover about 30 different knit fabric types. I'm not exaggerating, because there are so many ways, and they can also be knit in different methods. So I talk about all the fabric types, and of course we address what type of projects you can use for them. So for instance, like a light 4-way stretch lycra is fantastic for close-fitting garments, for instance, but you shouldn't use it to sew a hoodie, for instance, obviously, because it doesn't have enough stability. So sometimes, for some type of patterns, you do need the stability instead, because if you want to sew like a constructed jacket or maybe a pair of pants, you usually won't be as successful if you take a very lightweight knit, because that's not really meant for that kind of more structured garments that needs heavier fabric. So a lot of the success factor is understanding different type of knit fabrics and how they will affect the end result. So as Malena says, it's a huge thing. So for instance, you have to use 4-way stretch on certain garments, because otherwise you can't move in all directions, especially if you're doing like active wear or underwear and things like that, where you meant to ensure that you have a lot of movement. That's super, super important. So that's something we talk about a lot as well. And another thing that is very important, as Malena talked about, is also the sewing process, because that can too affect the fit. So one thing that we talk about a lot in the book is like the neckline. So the neckline can gape, right? And that can be both a fitting issue, but it can also be a sewing issue. Could you talk a little bit about that, Malena?
Yeah, and it's really tricky to know, is it a fitting issue or is it just a sewing issue? Because when you sew the seam, and the machine can actually stretch out the seam, like if you, for example, have a really foot pressure, like that is really high, it pushes down the fabric, and then the feeding dogs are like pulling the fabric, and it is gonna stretch out. Usually, if you steam it really well, it goes back, if the fabric also has a good recovery. But it might be that it has been stretched out, and when it's sewn, it's like stabilized in the stretched out way. So you really have to have. I always do test sewings, like a test sample on the real fabric, in the right amount of layers that I'm gonna sew, to make sure that both like the tension of the seam is good, and also that the foot pressure is okay. So always do tests. So you see that the seam is workable in the fabric. And I mean, speaking of neckline, we always we may make mistake, even though like I've been sewing since I was like 14, 15 years old or something. When I made the T-shirt for the Hazelhen tee, when I took for the cover, for the photo sample, the neckband was like slightly too short, and also when I did the top stitching, I didn't stretch out the neckline like anything, and the tension was really really high on that stitch, and it looked fine when you like just have the garment on a table or a hanger, no problem. But then when the model was wearing it, I mean, obviously since it's a tight garment, everything stretched out a little bit as it should. But then the neckline, that stitching kept it together, and the neckband also a little bit too tight, so it wasn't stretching out properly. So then you can see those drag lines from like the inner shoulder point, and it might look like it's a fitting issue, but it's actually a sewing issue. So, I mean, when I got the photos, I loved the photos, everything else except those drag lines. But then it was like, it's too far in the process now. I have to use those photos. I will retake them someday. Well, 3 years later, now it's like, okay, now we have a book about this. I can't have a cover photo with those drag lines. So now my model has retaken the photos. I didn't add a stitch this time. It's like, I'm not going to do that. And now it looks really, really nice. So yeah, even though you have all the experience, all the knowledge, we mess up as well, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a learning process. And again, fabric choice will also affect how the neckline looks like. For instance, if you're using a rib which has a lycra content, it has better recovery. But if you're using a fabric that is 100% cotton, for instance, or 100% maybe another natural fiber, it will stretch out and might not bounce back, right? Because when you put it on.
Yeah.
So that's also something to consider. And also in the book, speaking about that, we also talk about how to alter the length of the pattern piece. So for instance, usually if you buy a t-shirt pattern or get a t-shirt pattern, there will be only one pattern piece for the neckband. But as we have both discovered, different type of ribbing or neckline fabric will definitely affect how it looks like. So what I love about your sewing pattern, Malena, is that the Hazelhen tee, for instance, you have two different neckline patterns. One that is made for self fabric. I mean, self fabric is obviously like the t-shirt fabric. And then, which is slightly longer and slightly more narrow, right? And then you have a second pattern piece if you want to use like a ribbing fabric, which is quite common if you're sewing a t-shirt, which is usually like a 1x1 rib, for instance, with cotton lycra mix. And that is slightly shorter and slightly wider. And I have not seen that in any other sewing pattern. I'm sure there are others out there, but I definitely, as a consumer, really, really appreciate that extra effort. And if your sewing pattern doesn't have those options, which most doesn't, you can check our book and we show you how to like rough percentages of how much you should shorten the neckband depending on what type of fabric you want to use. So again, there are so many different factors, and if you are equipped with all this knowledge, you will get so much better result. And I think a lot of times when we are struggling with sewing and fitting knits is because we don't have an understanding of the fabric and how it relates to the fit and the sewing.
Yeah, that is so true. Like for the neckband example, like, yeah, you can't create one pattern piece that's gonna be suitable for all different types of fabric. Is just impossible. So as you said, like for the pattern that is suitable for rib, like 1x1 rib, then it is 75% of the neckline, and the one that is made for like the shell fabric, like the same fabric as you sewn the garment in, then it's like, I think it was 85% of the neckline length. And if you would use a stiffer fabric, then you might even have to make it even longer. So I've given two options, like the most common one, but if it could be something in between as well, or even shorter or even longer. So it's really like you have to adapt it based on your fabric, and you kind of get a hand feeling about it after a while, like when you pin the neckband to the neckline, and you like stretch it out and see like, is this gonna work or not? And I've done that like I pinned everything, and just before I'm gonna sew, it's like, no, this is too short. It's not gonna work. I have to make a longer neckband, because I can feel that when you stretch it out, it's like, yeah, no, it's not gonna match. So you get the experience in your hand. That's super important, and just because the pattern has a pattern piece for the neckband, you might have to adjust it.
Yeah, it's very, very true. And as you say, Malena, you can definitely feel it, especially if you're using like a lycra ribbing, or you're stretching it out, and you can start to feel like a resistance. And you know you're going to have to really pull the fabric when you're attaching it. There's probably a guarantee that there will be puckers when the fabric is, I mean, even though you can match it, it will pull it together, so you probably end up puckers. And the opposite is true, of course, as well. If you're using a very soft ribbing and you start to attach it along, and you see like, okay, this is actually as wide as the neckline now when I'm working on it, because that's probably not your goal. I mean, I would say there are probably some exceptions if you're using like a super stable fabric, but in all instances, the neckline, the neckband should be at least slightly shorter than the circumference of the neckline. So it's definitely good. Like if it started to grow, you should trim it probably.
Yeah, definitely,
sure.
because otherwise it won't lay flat when you wear it, and also when you wash it. I've seen this on so many bought samples that they have a 1x1 rib, and it's fine when you buy it, but then after you washed it a couple of times, like you see that the stretch in the fabric is it's growing, the rib, and then it starts to stand out, and even with the pressing, it's like still like bubbling. So it's so common on bought samples as well that maybe the length has not been, it's not really proper.
So that's probably some comfort as well. Even the pros, they don't always get it right. So don't be too hard on yourself if you end up not picking the right type of fabric, because it is tricky. But that's also why we made this book, because we want to like make sure that it won't be as tricky. Because when you read our book, Fit for Knits, you will just get so many like aha moments, I think, when you're like, that explains why my garment didn't end up the way I wanted it. So there's usually some like really like revelations I think you will find with this book. And we of course don't just cover top and necklines, we cover tops in general, and we also talk about pants, and we talk about skirts. So we go through all the garment types, and of course dresses as well, but that is mostly related to tops, so it's similar, and skirts. So if you mix them together, you will get the similar fitting issues. One thing I also talking about like revelations is you, Malena, you gave me some really, really fascinating revelations about the shape of the sleeve cap when you're sewing a knit top. That on some patterns you will see that the sleeve cap is quite low, quite flat, and on some it's quite high, and on some sleeve caps the front and the back piece is identical, and on some patterns the back sleeve cap is slightly less shallow shaped, and on the front it's slightly more shallow, the curve in the front. So could you talk a little bit about how the shape of the sleeve cap, how it differs, and why it's also something you need to like think about?
Yeah, so if it is the same front and back shape, then it's usually a simplified version, like to make it easier, to make it, I don't know, quicker, or less time consuming. But if you want to have a really nicely fitted jersey garment, you have to have different shape, both on the armhole, front and back. Front armhole is like more scooped out, it's more curved, because the shoulders are usually placed a little bit forward. And that's also why you want, like, the back armhole is, it's not that deep, because you want to have that extra width. And the same goes for the sleeve head shape, or the sleeve cap, that at the front it's a little bit more curved, since the armhole, your arm is placed a little bit forward, so you want it a little bit more scooped out, and in the back you want to have that little extra room for movement, so that's why it's less curved. So the shape is really really important. And also, as you talked about the height, you can have, for example, like the same shape for the armhole front and back. I mean, yeah, the shape front and back is different, but like on a garment, you can have different shape on the sleeve cap, and it still matches the armhole. So if you, for example, have a lower sleeve cap, then you need to have a bigger bicep for it to be able to fit the armhole. And this will give you more movement. You can lift up your arms more easily without the whole garment being lifted out. The downside is this, though, that when you have your sleeve down or arm down, there are going to be a little bit drag lines towards the outer shoulder point, since the sleeve head is so short. If you have a higher sleeve head, then it's going to be looking really nice when you have your arms down. So it's really suitable for like a little bit more fancier garments. But when you move your arms up, the whole garment is going to be lifted a little bit more easy. And I found a really good example of this is men's suit. If you have a suit, yes, it looks really nice when you have your arms down. But then if you, like a ballroom dancer, if you move your arms up, and if you have a regular suit, everything will be lifted up. I mean, it would not look great. But if you're a professional ballroom dancer, then you have also a special suit that has probably a little bit higher in the armhole and a lot less height in the sleeve head. So it looks really good when you have your arms up, because then the whole suit is also like staying down, and this is like the main pose for that garment. And when you have your arms down, they are going to be a little bit drag lines. It's probably going to feel a little bit tight, but that's fine, because the main purpose is to have your arms lifted up. So it really depends. Like one is good for one thing, and depends on what kind of garment you have. If you have activewear, a lower cap height is better then, because you get more movement.
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear. And I love that analogy to the ballroom dancing, because that really gives you an idea of how you have to like adapt depending on what type of base movement you have. So that's, again, something you have to consider. I mean, if you're making something that you want to work out in, for instance, you should definitely pick your sleeve cap and use that like slightly lower sleeve cap, right, rather than the high, which is probably nicer if you're like sitting in front of a computer trying to look chic at the office, so to speak, right? It gives
Exactly.
a different type of shape. So it all depends, right? There's no sleeve cap that fits all when it comes to the shaping. And again, we cover this in depth in the book. Malena has some really fantastic knowledge and illustrations, and she really goes into deep and explain this, and also how you can alter the sleeve cap shape depending on what type of use you want to have for your garment and the shaping. Another revelation that I got from Malena is the fact that on knit patterns, oftentimes, ideally, the sleeve cap should have a negative ease, meaning that the seam line length, the stitch line length of the sleeve cap is slightly shorter than the stitch or the seam line of the armhole. So it should be, the sleeve cap should be slightly stretched out during sewing, which goes against all common knowledge when constructing a pattern or sewing a woven fabric, because we have all been taught that there will be extra ease in the sleeve cap, and you need to like ease that in at the sleeve cap using like basting stitch, and you have to like pull the fabric together. And so, for instance, if you're sewing a jacket in wool, maybe could be several centimeters of ease that you need to fit in, which can be tricky, right? Because you don't want to have like puckers. I mean, puff sleeve is one thing, but you don't want to have unwanted gathers at the shoulder. So why, Malena, is it the opposite on lots of knit tops?
And I mean, it has to be to do with the sewing, that the seam is stretched out. And then if you have a little bit smaller sleeve cap, it's going to hold in a little bit better. And it just looks, it gets a better shape to the whole sleeve when you have a little bit negative ease. And it's not a lot, and it depends also a little bit on the fabric. But I would say like on a regular single jersey, you want to have like -1.5 maximum ease. So it just gives a nicer shape when, it gives a nicer shape when you wear it. So yeah, that is the complete opposite of how you construct a woven. And I didn't know this when I started working as an assistant. I don't even want to think about the first patterns I made. This I learned by doing, definitely.
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear that even though you trained as a pattern maker, you weren't like, this wasn't like a school thing. You had to learn it from people that was more experienced in the trade, which again shows how little knowledge there is when it comes to knit fabrics and pattern making, even if you go to school and learn about this, not just from books, right? I find this really...
and I think the fashion has also changed a lot for knit. Like in the early 90s, where like it's just oversized jersey t-shirts, like it required a little bit different constructions then, and it wasn't that important that the sleeve head was shaped because it was so oversized. So then you get by. But then nowadays, like, it's been a huge change, I think, in just the fashion for knitted garments. Like they have become much more advanced, and like detailing could almost be like on a woven, same details as on a woven garment. So that also then the pattern making, drafting has to evolve as well, and the sewing techniques and everything.
Yeah, that's very true, because I have some older sewing pattern for knits for both from the 70s and the 80s and also 90s. And I would say pretty much all of those have extra ease when you're doing the sleeves. So it was incredibly difficult to get them nice fitting. And now, of course, I understand why, because it shouldn't really be there unless perhaps if you're working with oversized, stable knit jacket, then maybe you could get away with it. But these were still patterns that was somewhat fitted, and it was extremely hard, if not impossible, to get all that extra fabric in without ending up with gathers around the sleeve cap area. We should also say that if you have a sewing pattern that you love, that perhaps is a little bit older and it has that extra ease, we show in the book as well how to remove sleeve cap ease, and also recommendations for how much you should aim for. Malena says about 1 centimeters, some would like that, but it also depends on the garment. So we have a list there, a guide where you can check if you want to do that. So just that little tweak will make a huge difference when it comes to the sewing experience, because we know that sewing sleeves can sometimes be a bit tricky, right? And it's also such a tell if it's a very visible issue, just like the neckline that we talked about earlier. Set-in sleeves that doesn't fit well, it definitely it shows, unfortunately.
Yeah, and also the sewing order is different from woven, because we usually start with the shoulder seam. Then I always do the neckline because it's so much easier to do the neckline before attaching the sleeves. But then you actually sew the sleeve in before you sew the side seam, and that is different compared to woven. So it's also a little bit because of that the sewing order is different.
Yeah, exactly. And we show all that, of course, again in the book. We also talk about another type of sleeve that is very common on knit garments, which is raglan sleeve, which is your favorite topic to write about, right, Malena?
No, this has been therapy for me. I don't want to express my true emotions for raglan sleeve. I hate it. It's not my cup of tea, if we are putting it correctly, politely.
Yeah.
No, because the reason is there are always going to be drag lines when you have your arm down. You can't avoid them. And if you have the perfect, you with darts and everything, no drag lines at all, then the whole garment is going to lift up when you move your arms. So it's you can't get them, you can't avoid all those drag lines. And here's also a little bit, we talk about this in the book, don't overfit it. It's okay. Some drag lines are acceptable. It means that if there are drag lines to the outer shoulder point from the bottom of your armhole, it means that you are going to be able to lift your arms easier and better. so it's a great garment for to have as a workout wear when you exercise, because the movement is going to be so much better. But yeah, I mean, it is really tricky. You have to basically fit the shoulder into a flat pattern. Like, it's impossible. So no, and yeah, no, raglan is not a favorite of mine. It looks really nice. I mean, I don't mind the style at all. It's just the fitting that is really tricky to get it really right.
Yeah, because when you look at a raglan pattern, you get what you say there. I mean, if you a satin sleeve and a shoulder, it mimics the body, right? It's very like you can see exactly. It's like building on your natural body, whereas like a one-piece raglan sleeve, it doesn't look anything like the body, because you're basically trying to get the shoulder and the sleeve in one singular piece, which allows for no shaping unless you slice the raglan sleeve pattern in two or add darts. It's going to be really, really difficult. But that said, you have definitely really been very ambitious with this section of the book, because even though I know that you are not a fan of raglan in that sense, you've done some excellent tutorials on how to at least reduce a lot of the fitting issues that comes with raglan. So don't feel like as if you're reading the book and you have struggles with raglan. I can assure you that Malena do have some really helpful method that will at least make the raglan sleeve look better. So definitely there's all the information you need there, but I totally understand you. It's very difficult. There will always be drag lines and excess fabrics, as you say, because if you would fit it perfectly, you wouldn't be able to move your arms, right? Because it's going to be
No, exactly.
Going to be like a straight jacket. You don't want that.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. No, so we cover a lot of different types of raglan and what you can do, and to a certain point, and then you kind of have to add a dart on the sleeve or add a seam or something to get in more shape. So we show you that as well. So hopefully you will still be able to get a good enough fit, because you don't want to overfit it, because then the movement is compromised. So it's always a compromise between it looking good and also the purpose of the garment, like being able to move and work out, or to lift your arms up, basically.
Yeah. So that's as you probably guessed, the chapter about tops is the single largest chapter, but we do have some other chapters as well. And I would like to talk a little bit about trousers as well, or pants, or sewing pants with knit fabrics, because another area that a lot of us struggles with is the crotch area, Malena. Why is it so difficult to get the crotch to look right when we're sewing pants?
Yeah, I mean it is a tricky area, and especially also to do fitting on, because, well, when you bend over and you try to pin, and then it's difficult to work with. And here we also show a little bit different types of method, like you can use, like how you can pin on the inside, and like different ways of doing it. But definitely there can be a lot of issues in the crotch area. It's we cover a lot of different things, and especially on leggings, for example, as well. When you don't have a side seam, we also give you insights on how to adjust those kind of patterns, because then you only have the front and back, front rise and the inside seam to work with. So then you are much more restricted on how to do the adjustments.
Yeah, because you basically only have the crotch seam and the inseam, right? There's no other way of adding or reducing width on a garment, or adding shape. So yeah, that's definitely also, again, something you don't really see in most pattern books, a pattern alteration. How do you alter a pair of pants or a pair of leggings that only has like an inseam? That's definitely, but Malena shows that as well. So I think you will find those things really, really eliminating as well. And we also, of course, as Malena mentioned, also talk about different methods. So for instance, sometimes it's easier to baste when you're doing fittings, and sometimes you can use pins. So we definitely show a little bit different methods as. And you, Malena, you have like always one thing what you always say is like always do a sample, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, because if you buy a really expensive fabric, I mean, you don't want to waste it to find out that the fit wasn't right for you. So I always recommend to do, it can be a wearable prototype first. The important thing here is just to remember that the stretch really has to be similar. Not exactly same maybe, but it has to be similar because that will, I mean, as we talked about, it will affect the fit. So a similar stretch on the fabric and the thickness and weight and a little bit depending on what type of fabric it is. But always recommend to do a test because if you do a test, it's so much easier to cut in the garment then without feeling bad. Because sometimes it is really tricky to really see what is the issue here and also to know how much to adjust. For example, we show you if you want to do a full bust adjustment, like how much width should you add? It's like, I don't know. I have no idea. I cut the garment, cut a little hole, like preferably on both sides, and I see how much gape, like how much width I need to add, and I measure it. Otherwise, it's just guessing. This is the only way to do it to give it an exact measurement. When you pin it like you want to remove fabric, it's so much easier because you obviously then don't have to cut it. You can just pin it, and maybe sometimes you can just sew it in, and it works fine. But it's the adding width that is a little bit more tricky, and then you usually have to cut it open. And especially also when we talk about sleeve, like the fitting of the armhole, is it the bodice that is a problem? Is it the shoulder or is it the sleeve? Then it can actually be easier to cut away the sleeve or just like 10 centimeters or something, to see what's happening. Like, was it the sleeve that was too tight or was it something with the armhole? So it's so much easier if you are able to cut in the garment.
Yeah, that's very, very true. You also have usually less seam allowance to work with as well when you're fitting, because on a woven fabric, the standard seam allowance is like 1.5 centimeters, which is 5/8 inches. Whereas when you're doing knit garments, it's usually between maybe 6 millimeters to 1 centimeter, which is 1/4 of an inch to 3/4 of an inch. So you have less than half usually seam allowance to work with. So you don't have a lot of room for errors. And also perhaps you're using an overlock stitch. So that means that you have like closed the seam allowance, so to speak, as well, or maybe cut it off using a surgeon knife. So it's really, really difficult to do alteration after the fact. Whereas on a woven fabric, you can just open the straight seam up and let out some fabric, and then maybe you have managed to add that extra width. So you definitely have to do a lot more thinking beforehand, I think, with knits that way as well.
Yeah, and on a woven garment, it's so much easier to fit along as you sew. Because it has plus ease over the body, like the garment is bigger compared to your body. But a lot of knitted garments, they have a negative ease, meaning that the actual garment is going to be smaller than your body, since the fabric is going to be stretched out when wearing. So then it's like really, really difficult to fit as you sew, because then the raw edges might be stretched out if you try it on. So that I would be really careful with. If you have like a big hoodie or sweater, oversized t-shirt, something, then it's much easier to do. But not on the garment when you have negative ease. So that's why important to also to have similar, if not correct, fabric stretch on the prototype, because otherwise it's gonna give a false result, I would say.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. So I think hopefully we managed to give you some new ideas about how to pattern fit and sew knit clothes. And also, if you're curious about the book, you can find it over the most likely spot if you want the print book is on Amazon. It's available in most, if not all, Amazon marketplaces around the world. And if you want to get the ebook, you can get it over at my shop, which is shop.theloststitch.com. Or if you like the Kindle version, again, that you can get on Amazon. And the ebook version that you get from my shop is as a PDF format, so it works with every type of reader. We should also talk a little bit about the realities of making a book, because we don't have a big publisher behind us, right? We did everything ourselves.
Who is the publisher, Johanna?
I am the publisher. Yes, every book needs to have a publisher. In my case, I am actually having my own publishing company, The Last Stitch as well. So that has been a huge learning experience because all my sewing books I have published myself. I have experience previously with working with the publisher. When I was long time ago, I wrote books about how to use the internet. That was in the early 80s, right? That was almost 25 years ago. So you had to read a paper book on how to use the internet. So I had some experience in the publishing industry that way. And I also have a background in newspaper and magazines, so I knew how to write and like design pages. However, this has been a huge learning curve, especially figuring out how to get physical copies of the book around the world. That has been a massive, massive struggle if you're a small publisher based as we are in Sweden as well.
Yeah, I can only imagine like the logistic behind it. I mean, it must be a nightmare to figure everything out.
Yeah, it took me so long, and I still struggle sometimes. But yeah, so what is that? Right now, this system is like this: that once the digital files are done and everything, the book is sent out to a printer, and then the printer ships all the books to distributor, and the main distributor is based in the UK because the books that I do and that we do are all made in English, so the biggest market is English speaking countries. So, and then the distributor has a deal with Amazon so that Amazon will list the books that this distributor is distributing. So I myself am not able to get into Amazon as myself or my publishing company. I have to go the route via distributor because they have access to the Amazon marketplace. So just that is like a big hurdle to get over. And then, of course, because Amazon is such a big company, they set all the terms, they set all the pricing, and they can, tell if it's going to be available, which in each marketplace, I have no say over that. Neither do I or my distributor. And also sometimes it can be frustrating because sometimes Amazon does things wrong. So for instance, with this book, because the title is Fit for Knits, Amazon in the UK put it into categories which has nothing to do with sewing. One is fitness, because fit, right? And the other one is knitting, because knits. And I've tried to change this, both myself, but I have just been like neglected. And then through my distributor, but they have not been able to sort this out either. So that kind of frustrated because I can't, like, the book has been, if it had been in the sewing category, it would be in a #1 bestseller. But because it's not, it's in knitting and fitness, it's totally different. You will still be able to find it, but that's just a few like behind the scenes stuff of how difficult it can be to. So I understand, because I want to make sure that the book is available everywhere, and it's like a price that is accessible. But the reality is that it's extremely difficult to publish a print book and get it around the world, and expensive, unfortunately. So that's the reality of it.
Yeah, I mean, that is hilarious. That is, I don't know, a fitness category. That means like, no, you can't automate everything in the work. Like a human being has to be to see what is it actually, which category should it actually belong to. That is just so funny.
Yeah, it's funny, but also it's frustrating. But I can laugh at it now, but sometimes I get super frustrated. But again, that's why we also want to say we're so very grateful for that to all of you that has already gotten our books, and of course also that you took the time and wrote reviews, because those help a lot as well, because it's not easy to get new eyes on a book, because we have some people that follow our work, but we also need to reach outside our own community, right? So if you have bought the book, and we would be so grateful if you wanted to add a review as well, or just spread the word if you like the book. You can of course say if you don't like the book, otherwise it's very important that you feel free to do that. But we're just very, very grateful for all of you that has recommended the book, because it helps so much to get the word out there and hopefully help others that are having similar struggles that many of us have when it comes to sewing and fitting knit garments.
Yeah, definitely. And if you want to read a little preview or get a sample, you can still get a sample from your website, right?
Yes, you can. So you could search for, we have a sample for how to do like full bust FBA adjustments. So you can, and small bust adjustments as well. So you can search for FBA or full bust adjustment on my website, thelostitch.com. And then in that blog post, there's also a download link where you can get access. You can get an idea of what the book is about. So that's a very good point as well. So yeah, we're very, very proud of our baby, and hopefully we're going to make some more books in the future when we have like recuperated and gotten our like time and energy, because it takes a lot of, as we said, 2.5 years to get the book out there. So yeah, it's not happening. A new book is not happening tomorrow, but we have some great plans, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you're in the process, then you just come up with so many new ideas of other things you also want to do. So yeah, there's definitely ideas.
Yeah, so stay tuned, and we're going to keep you updated on this pod and on other channels. So Malena, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram. Hazelhen Patterns is my name there.
And you can find me also on Instagram as Last Stitch. And my main hub of all the things I do is thelaststitch.com, where there's also a big page there where you can learn more about the books as well. Everything will be very easy to find on the front page of my website. Thank you so much for listening, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.